Lloyd, I wonder if you could tell me a bit about yourself, a bit about your background.
Sure. I live in New York, or outside of New York City, about 110 miles. For the last 10 years, I've been a full-time photographer. I always shot pictures since I've been an adult, and I'm in my 60s now. But for a long time, my career was as an editorial magazine art director in New York and Los Angeles and San Francisco. I did magazines like Rolling Stone and Condé Nast Traveler. I helped revive Vanity Fair. I helped invent the redesign of House and Garden. So, excuse me. So I had a career for a long time just doing beautiful magazines and taking pictures for myself as I got to travel around the world. And about 10 years ago, I decided that it was time for me to really just put all my effort into photography. And so I stopped designing, and that's what I'm doing now.
Graham, how did you meet Lloyd?
I met Lloyd on a beach in Mexico, in Tulum, Mexico.
We met, I think, in '94, and I mean, I've gone back, and I know Graham has gone back many times too, and it changes just a little bit every year. But in '94, I think Graham and his girlfriend were sleeping in a tent.
So you met in Mexico, you struck up a friendship, and it's 20 years later almost, and and now you're publishing books together.
I know it's beautiful, isn't it? When you meet somebody that you just click with, and Graham was from the Yukon. Well, I was at that. I'd never met anyone from the Yukon, and that sounded so interesting and exotic to me. And Graham kept inviting me and my partner up to visit him and his girlfriend, who became his wife. And finally, we went there, and I never imagined going to Alaska or the Yukon. I had traveled a lot. I'd hitched around Europe when I was 20 for a year, and I'd quit working and lived in Greece for a year another time. But I don't think I ever would have gotten up to what we're calling in the book near north, but for me it's the far north. Unless I had met Graham.
So Graham, when did the idea come into your head of doing a book with Lloyd?
It became really clear when I saw a lot of his photographs he had taken on the trip. We spent a few weeks traveling around Yukon, Alaska. We went to a lot of the destinations that a lot of your listeners would be very familiar with. And when I saw Lloyd's take on a lot of places which we consider to be our backyard, it was just so different from anything I'd ever seen. I'd worked as a book publisher for quite a long time. I'd worked with a lot of photographers, but I hadn't seen anything quite like this. This was very unique, and it was exciting. It was invigorating to actually see a fresh perspective.
What did you see, Lloyd, when you saw the Yukon and Alaska for the first time?
Well, I had really no idea what to expect. We went up in the summer solstice, just before in the middle of June, and Stephen, my partner, and I flew up to Fairbanks, and Graham picked us up. And I really didn't have a picture in my mind of what to expect, and suddenly there was all this space. And Graham picked us up at the airport. He had a tent set up at some park about half hour away, and it wasn't dark. It didn't get dark, and then we drove to Denali, and it was just so vast, and it had one thing that I really, really loved, which I hadn't thought about, was the horizon line was so far away, and which reminded me of why I like shooting on at the beach, when the horizon line is like it's the curve of the ocean. And I grew up in LA, and we'd go out to the desert, and the horizon line would be really far. And Alaska had that same feeling, and so I really responded to this sense of space, and the change, and how scale could confuse you. You couldn't really tell how far you were away from something. And I had my camera with me, so my trusty Leica M2, which I'd had for, at that point, about, 30 years. And I shot black and white film. I've always responded to where I am with my camera, and I was just happy.
Let me ask you about and you as well, Graham, about the decision to use black and white. I mean, Graham, most of the photo books that we see of the Yukon are filled with color images. Why the decision to put out a book with black and white pictures?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of color books out there, and there always has been a tradition. They're fine. What really captured me was that Lloyd primarily shoots black and white photography, and it was just so compelling. It really didn't matter to me whether it was color or black and white. But when I sat down and started actually really looking at how we were going to organize this into a book, it became really apparent to me that these weren't the type of photographs that you'd associate with, romantic photographers, guys like Ansel Adams, which were interested in a lot of technical issues. These were really spirited photographs. These were the type of photographs where sometimes the horizon line isn't exactly straight, and that's great. Lloyd was shooting a lot of sort of grainy film, and so the pictures come out, and they have a certain rawness to them, but also sort of a naive quality that you capture when you're car camping around Yukon, Alaska with a great New York photographer.
Thank you. Yeah, at that point in my life, which we shot these pictures. Our trip was in 2002, which sounds far away right now, but in my head it seems like yesterday. But in 2002, I really I'd been shooting black and white almost all my life, and it's what I thought pictures. I really responded to pictures like that. In fact, I still do, although because of time and it's now 2010, I do shoot some digital, and I'm enjoying it, and it's fun to learn new stuff. For me, being able to do what I wanted to do with black and white was always the best. And also, I'm not very technical. So once I really learned how to take photographs when I was in college, I think, and just walking around with a camera, and I stopped drawing because when you're a kid and you're artistic, you can draw pretty well, and then you grow up and you realize lots of people can draw pretty well. But when I started taking photographs, I realized nobody quite saw things exactly the way I saw them. And I could do what I wanted to do and get it out in the world, or at least under my bed, better than a lot of other people. I just sort of stuck with what I learned with a 35 millimeter Leica M2 Tri-X, and it was easy. I didn't have to use a light meter. I just walked around with my camera strapped around my wrist, and I was fast, and I'm still fast, and so I learned how to respond that way quickly, and the black and white was it was classic, and it still is classic. I still have clients now who say, "Well, yeah, we like your color, but be sure and shoot some black and white too, because that's really rich. And use film, don't use digital, because you can't get the quality with digital and black and white that you can with beautiful film. Although we're losing the ability to print it because the people who made the paper are going out of business, unfortunately."
Graham, anything else?
Oh, it's just an absolute pleasure to work with someone of Lloyd's stature on a book like this. We're hoping that it starts a lot of potential for arts publishing for us here in the Yukon.
Thank you, Graham. It's great to work with you guys, and thank you so much for being interested in wanting to talk to me. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate you both taking the time out today, and thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dave.